The winter sun barely rose over the crooked rooftops of Cold Creek Village, its pale light drowned beneath a storm that crackled like the breath of wolves. Snow hammered the wooden chapel where the townsfolk had gathered, some out of fear, some out of curiosity, and many just to see something break the monotony of their bleak lives. In the center of the stone-floored hall, a rough wooden table had been dragged forward, and upon it knelt a young woman whose hands were bound tightly behind her back. Her blonde braid hung over her shoulder, shaking each time the icy wind burst through the cracks in the walls. Her name was Clara, though nobody bothered to speak it. To them she was simply the thief, the girl who had stolen. A loaf of bread from old man Herod's shop, an unforgivable sin in a village, where hunger made men cruel and justice even crueler. The priest stood beside her, his heavy robe stirring in the drafts, his voice steady as he read from a weathered holy book, proclaiming that sin must be met with consequence. He did not look at Clara's bruised knees or the cut on her leg from when the guards dragged her here. He didn't look at her trembling lips, whispering that she was sorry, that she only meant to feed the orphan boy freezing behind the stables. Outside, the storm howled against the chapel door, and inside, the villagers watched with hollow eyes, too tired, too afraid, or too conditioned to protest. This was how justice always worked in Cold Creek, swift, merciless, unquestioned. A rope hung above Clara like the winter moon itself, unwavering and cold. The executioner checked the knots while the villagers murmured, their breath turning to mist around them. Stealing bread, one whispered. She should have asked. She did, another hissed back. Herod turned her away. The priest lifted his hand and the crowd fell silent. Clara of Cold Creek, he declared, you are found guilty of theft. The chapel doors suddenly exploded inward as a violent gust of snow smothered the candles, plunging half the room into a flickering darkness. A tall man stomped inside, kicking the snow off his boots. His long coat was coated with frost, and his hat, heavy with ice, shadowed the hard set of his jaw. Everyone recognized him instantly, Elias Hart, the widowed rancher from the outskirts of town, a man who kept to himself after the tragic death of his wife and daughter, a man who rarely spoke but whose presence carried weight heavier than iron. What is this? Elias thundered, his voice echoing through the chapel. The guards stepped back. Even the priest faltered. Elias's sharp eyes locked on Clara. She met his gaze with fear, but also something else, something desperate, pleading, human. The girl stole bread, the priest said stiffly. And the sentence is death. For bread? Elias roared. You'd hang a starving child while the man she stole. From sits fat in his chair, old man Herod sputtered from the crowd. She's a thief. Today it's bread. Tomorrow it's nothing if she's dead, Elias snapped. The executioner reached for the rope, but Elias moved like a striking wolf, slamming his hand onto the table. Touch that rope and I'll personally drag you through the snow by your teeth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one challenged Elias Hart, not after the war, not after the tragedies he carried. The priest steadied himself. Rancher Hart, this is not your place. It is, Elias growled, pulling out the knife holstered at his belt. When a wrong is being done, before anyone could stop him, he sliced through the rope binding Clara's hands. It snapped like brittle vines and Clara gasped, her arms falling free. She stared at him, stunned, frost gathering in her lashes. Elias sheathed his knife and shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. No one should face death on an empty stomach, he said quietly. Eat first. From inside his coat pocket, he produced a small loaf of bread, his last ration from the week, now held out to the girl everyone else had condemned. Clara blinked, tears spilling freely, not from pain but from disbelief. The crowd shifted uneasily. No one had expected this, not mercy, not rebellion, not Elias Hart. If anyone has something to say, Elias challenged, turning back toward the villagers. Say it now, but nobody dared. And so, as the storm raged outside, the widowed rancher lifted Clara off the table, her legs weak beneath her, and guided her toward the open door, away from the noose, away from the people who would have watched her die for a crust of bread. The snow swallowed them both as they stepped into the storm, leaving the silent, conflicted villagers behind. And though none of them knew it yet, this single act of mercy would start a fire bigger than the storm. Outside, a fire that would change Cold Creek forever. The storm grew wilder as Elias held Clara steady, half dragging, half supporting her through the knee-deep snow that blanketed the forest path. She could barely walk. The cold stung her wounds, and every step felt like broken glass inside her knees. But Elias's grip was firm, reassuring, like someone who had once carried a daughter through the same snow, someone who remembered how to shield the weak even when his own heart had nearly stopped beating years ago. "Why did you save me?" Clara finally whispered, breaking the long silence between them. Her voice trembled like the wind chimes on the abandoned chapel porch. Elias didn't answer immediately. He simply handed her another bite of the bread and kept walking. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. "Because hunger isn't a crime, and because I've lost enough people already." The path opened into a valley where Elias's ranch stood, sturdy fences, a dim lantern glowing in the barn, smoke curling from a chimney. A lonely place, yet strangely warm against the winter gloom. He guided Clara into the house, and the moment the door closed behind them, the blizzard's fury dulled into a faint roar. Elias lit the hearth, placing a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. Clara sat on a wooden chair near the fire, the bread still clutched in her hand, steam rising from her frozen skin. "Elias," she murmured, struggling for words. "They would have killed me." "I know." He set a pot of stew over the fire. "Cold Creek forgot what mercy looks like. Someone has to remind them." Clara blinked at him, stunned that someone who'd lost so much could speak of mercy at all. But maybe that was exactly why he could. As the stew simmered, Elias stepped outside to tend the horses. Clara watched from the window, warmth returning to her limbs as the flames flickered. She pressed her palm to the glass, realizing something that made her chest tighten. Elias' heart had risked everything for her. In a village ruled by fear, challenging the priest and the council wasn't bravery. It was rebellion. When Elias returned, snow clung to his hair and coat. He set 2 bowls of stew on the table and nodded for Clara to join him. She stood gingerly, her injured leg trembling. But he offered his arm without hesitation. They ate in a silence that was soft, safe, alive, something neither of them had felt in a long time. After a moment, Clara spoke. "If the council comes, for you, it'll be my fault." Elias shook his head. "If they come, it'll be because they've forgotten what it means to be human." "That's not on you." Clara's eyes shimmered with fresh tears. "I wasn't stealing for myself," she whispered. "It was for little Thomas, the orphan boy behind the stables. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Elias froze. His jaw tightened. "And they still condemned you?" Clara nodded. Rage flared inside Elias like a forge brought to life. A village that would hang a girl trying to feed a starving child was a village broken beyond repair. "You'll stay here until your wounds heal," he said firmly. "And after that, we'll find the boy." The crackling fire filled the silence with warmth and possibility. For the first time since the rope had slipped around her wrists that morning, Clara felt hope bloom inside her, not small and trembling, but bright and growing. And for Elias, something long buried stirred too, a sense of purpose, of protecting someone again, of standing between the innocent and the cruel. The night deepened around them, thick with snow and secrets. But inside the ranch, 2 souls, one broken, one healing, sat together in fragile peace. They didn't know what battles tomorrow would bring. They didn't know how Cold Creek would react once word spread. But they knew this. Mercy had sparked a wildfire, and neither of them was going to let it die. As the final embers glowed and Clara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally easing into rest, Elias looked toward the door as if challenging the world outside. "Nobody hangs for bread on my land," he whispered. And the storm outside carried his vow across the valley like a warning. This was only the beginning.